Hi, lovelies! If you've already seen the first part of this process in last week's video, then I know you're itching to get back into it. So we're going to forego the fancy intro and just jump right in. The first thing I'm making for the second floor is the door. I'm using just a scrap piece of poster board, and I'm using the doorway of the dining room on the main floor to measure the height, because I want to make sure the scale kind of fits together cohesively within this whole build, even though I'm not following a specific scale per se. And I've decided to work on the back wall first and then layer stuff from there, because it's much easier to do it that way than to like build out and then have to shove things behind. This black piece of poster board I cut out just a little bit bigger than the door, so I can use these strips of white poster board for the door frame, and I can glue that all together and then put that on the wall as one big piece instead of having to worry with all the little pieces in a tight space. So yeah, I'm building the door by itself, and then I'll glue it into the bedroom. And all of the door frame pieces are just strips of, again, that leftover poster board. And I have mitered the edges. I just cut the first one, eyeballed it, and then used that first piece as a guide to measure the next piece. And then I used that next piece as a guide to measure the next piece. And that just helps me get all the angles to match with each other. And then I glue them all one by one. And I'm keeping just a tiny little bit of a gap between the door frame and the door, because in real life, the door frame and the door don't fit perfectly snugly. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to open it. You need that teeny tiny gap in order for the door to swing. So that's what I've done there. And I've added a little bead. It's just a little seed bead for the doorknob. And I cut strips that are a little bit thicker than the door frame strips to act as baseboard. And just after I glued the door in, then I could measure the space that was available around the door. And I didn't put anything on that back wall or on the side wall, because that's where the bed's going to go. And I don't want to layer too much because I'm limited on the space that I have to work with. For the bed, I'm using this scrap of packing foam. I measured how thick, based on the space that's available. And then I used my craft knife to cut the foam, and I pushed the blade out a little farther than I normally would so that the foam doesn't get caught on the handle or any of the mechanisms. I start with a sawing motion and then do that glide. I find sawing through the foam first before gliding the knife through helps to keep the blade from tearing at the foam, so I get a nice clean cut. Now, to cover up the foam and turn it into a mattress, I'm using a scrap of white cotton canvas, and I'm just going to glue this down with tacky glue, making sure that the top is nice and tight and flat so it looks pretty. And then I'm just wrapping the fabric around the sides, and I don't care too much what the bottom looks like because the bed's going to be permanently glued into the house. So if the bottom where it's going to be glued down doesn't look perfect, that's fine. I decided to start with just the top and around the sides first to get everything secure before I work on the shorter edges. Now that the first sides of the mattress are dry, I trimmed the short sides, and I'm going to glue and fold those in place. And I'm just kind of pinching and folding, kind of like if you were wrapping a present is sort of how it is. And I'm just making sure that all of the foam is covered by the fabric and that everything is tucked in nice and tight and smooth so that it lays nice when it goes into the house and so that it looks nice. And this is what the trimming looks like. I'm just kind of trimming it at an angle, cutting off the extra from the bottom so it's not too bulky, and angling it up around to the top so I have fabric to wrap around down to the bottom. And just pinch and fold and glue. I gobbed my glue on pretty thick, but then I used a thick fabric and it was needed to get everything to lay in place. If I had have used a thinner fabric, I could have used less glue. I also used a crystal paperweight on top just to make sure that it dried nice and flat. I used a little scrap of this beautiful purple and green tartan to be the like a bed sheet, and I glued it first upside down so I could then fold over that little bit at the top to make it look like the bed had been made. And I also did some hospital corners to fold the ends in and make them look all neat down at the bottom. None of that was necessary. But anyway, that's what I did. Now I'm using the coffee stir sticks, and I filed one end that I had cut at an angle, and then I'm lining it up to the bed to mark where to cut for that piece. Basically, I'm making like the base for the bed. It's like a platform, or it's going to look like a platform bed. Again, just using tacky glue to glue it into place. And the straight end is going up at the head of the bed, and that angled end is going down at the foot. I just angled the two ends at the foot there so that they would lay nicer. You can kind of see there it forms a nicer corner than if I overlapped the two flat ends. And I've got a little bit of paper on the bottom. It's just that cereal box card, just so I have a nice flat surface when I come to glue the bed into the room. And this is where I discovered that I measured my foam, and now the bed is too wide and overhangs where it needs to go. And just like Barbie, yeah, I'm doing a face palm. Crap, I gotta fix this now. So to mark where I need to cut the bed down, I put the bed in the room backwards because all this finagling is going to happen on the backside. So regardless of what it looks like, when it eventually gets fixed and glued in, that's all going to be covered up by the back wall. So I made the mark, and now I'm working on cutting it apart. This whole process was both complicated and made a little bit easier by having everything still wet. I didn't wait until the bed had dried to start fixing it, which actually kind of worked in my benefit because the glue hadn't set, so it was still soft, which meant I could move the fabric and pull things apart nicely without anything ripping. But the glue had started to harden and it was thicker, so it made the fabric easier to manipulate because it would sort of stay where I moved it. So at this point, I have removed the paper. I'm taking the wood off. I'll glue that back on later, just so it's easier to hold on to. And I'm trying to get the foam out at this point. I don't want to cut everything down. My plan is to just cut out the extra foam and then rewrap it with the fabric. I have to cut some of the extra fabric just because there is a little bit more than what I'm going to need in the end. But that's the plan anyway. Remove the extra foam and then rewrap it. There's that little base of cardboard. I just ripped that off again just so I could get to the fabric. And yeah, this is, not gonna lie, this was a huge pain in the arse. I'm including all the footage though because this shit happens quite frequently. Just with crafting in general and with miniature making in particular. And I like to be honest about this kind of stuff. As fun and, cool as it is to watch the videos where everything just kind of goes together and it's like magic. And I know my channel is called Magic, but the truth is that sometimes this crap happens behind the magic, and you need to know about it because, I don't want you getting into this stuff thinking, oh, this is going to be easy, and then when it isn't, you end up thinking, what did I do wrong? It's my fault. I messed up. But no, honey, it's not your fault. Sometimes this happens, and it happens to the best of us. And you just, if you want that end result, you just work through it and you figure out how to fix it. Or you start over and do it again. In this case, I wanted to see if I could just fix it because that mattress had looked so good. I didn't want to have to start from scratch if I didn't have to. Sometimes you have to start from scratch, but sometimes you can take what you have and modify it and work around your whoopsie and turn it into something awesome. So, yeah, if you're ever in a position where you're making stuff and it's not working out, I just want you to know that I'm rooting for you because I've been there. I know what it's like. You're not alone. And yeah, I'm in your corner cheering you on. So, yeah, that's the whole point of sharing this. So after I pulled out the foam, I'm just trying to scrape away some of the residue because some of the foam did stick to the fabric. The glue had started to dry in places. Yeah, I tried to scrape it with the knife. That was not a good idea. I was starting to cut the fabric, and so I stopped and just went with the fingernail. I didn't get it perfectly, but again, good enough is good enough. Sometimes you just have to work with what you have and turn it into the best thing that you possibly can. And you never know. Sometimes when you do that, in the end, it works out pretty awesome. This foam, it is nice and soft and squishy, as is the fabric. So the residue, it was a thin layer, and it really didn't add that much. There was no extra texture or anything that I could see, but then I also had, 2 layers of fabric on top of the foam, so that covered it up nicely. Yeah, a lot of the work that I do, yet again, is off screen because when I'm in the zone and I'm working, I don't always check the viewfinder to make sure that I'm in frame. I just want to get this thing done. So I apologize if you can't always see what I'm doing, but that's why. It's because I need to bring it up to my eyeballs to see it. Okay, so after rewrapping and re-gluing the fabric around the now smaller piece of foam, I glued it back to the cereal box card. And again, I'm doing that just so I have a nice flat surface for when I glue the bed to the house. Crossed my fingers there because I don't want to have to do this again, and I really hope it works. And again, I used just something heavy to keep everything to glue, nice and flat and secure. I decided to wait until everything had dried before I cut the excess of the paper or that cardstock stuff. Just because if the glue is wet when you're trying to cut the cardstock, the extra from the foam and the fabric, it can move around, it can slide. So waiting for the glue to dry keeps it nice and secure, and then when you cut, you're getting a straight line and it's not going to slip and slide on you. And then just replacing the wood pieces to make that. I keep forgetting what that style of bed is called. That bed frame. I keep wanting to call it a box, but I don't think that's Platform. It's a platform bed. Yes. Okay. So I'm gluing the wood back to make it a platform. And I didn't really do anything to the wood at this point. I do end up having to cut down the edges a little bit, but I glued them on first and then did that. Which, yep, I was going to use scissors. That would not have been good. I'm using my pliers now instead because I can get in nice and close and it'll clip quickly. The scissors, they have to like grip and then it moves. And now I'm just giving that cut edge a quick sand because when you cut wood, it gets all rough and scraggly, and I don't want to scratch the paint when I glue the bed into the house. And also I want it to lay flat, so sanding it down so it's nice and flat, and then finagling the wood pieces while it's still wet and will still move, and then I'll let it dry. Now I'm taking a scrap of the wood plank that I used to make the second floor, and I'm just making a mark on something that's gonna get made later, and moving on to a completely new something with some scrap of foam and a little scrap of the fabric that I used for the bed sheet. I'm making a pillow. So I'm just going to use some tacky glue and glue and wrap the foam in the fabric like a little fabric burrito. I decided not to sew this because I didn't want to. I'm going to glue the pillow in place, so if there's a glued seam underneath, it really doesn't matter. You're not going to see it anyway. So I'm just gluing the fabric all the way around the little bit of foam there, and then I'm going to glue the ends just flat down to each other so it looks like a rectangular pillowcase. Even though I'm not going to sew it, I still want it to look like it was sewn, you know, like it's a pillowcase. And I am bringing out the clamps yet again. Those are just cheap arse Dollar Tree clamps, but boy howdy, I love them. Once again, they have, as I think the kids are saying, come in clutch. Actually, I've seen those clamps, or clamps that look very like it, at the fabric store. So, but these are like cheap arse looking. So are the ones at the fabric store, though. So I'm glad I didn't pay that much for them. Anyway, leave that to dry. Move on to the door handle. I started just slapping down some gold, but that was going to take forever to cover up the green color of the bead. So I switched to some black paint to hide the green, and then I will gold on top of that once the black dries. Now that the bed is completely dry, I'm giving the platform a coat of white paint because, well, I've already established that I'm going with white wood for like the trim and stuff in the bedroom. So I figured a white wood bed would just fit the theme and look really nice. It was really fiddly painting that tiny little stir stick edge and trying to get the paint just on the wood and not on the fabric. I managed. Now this is the piece of wood plank that I had cut earlier. I ended up cutting two pieces, like two lengths of wood, and smushed them together, glued them in place, and now obviously I'm painting it white. This is going to be a dresser that's going to go on the wall on the other side of the room from where the bed's going to go. And that skinny piece is just one length of that wood plank strip. It's a little bit taller, and it's going to be the headboard for the bed. I just measured it the same way I showed in that tiny clip earlier. Just put the plank and then drew and cut. Now this is a sandwich of two pieces of that mermaid shell patterned fabric with a little bit of flannelette in the middle. And I sewed the square together and then sewed over all of the little shell scallops. I was attempting to make this look like a quilt. It's not quite as poofy as I had hoped, but at this scale it's pretty hard to do. And I sewed with white thread because I don't have gold thread. And now I'm obviously going in and coloring the thread in gold marker just to bring that gold color back out because there was gold outlining the scales. And the marker pen actually worked really, really well. Isn't that pretty? Now I'm going to glue that to the bed, which basically renders all of the other fabric that I put on underneath completely useless. I could have just done strips of the white and the check. Whatever. I completely made the bed and did hospital corners and the whole 9 yards, and I will know that they were there, and you will know that they are there. Okay, now I'm taking a little bit of poster board, a little scrap, and I'm just measuring basically the size of the dresser, but a little bit smaller, and then I'm cutting it out. And basically I'm making drawers, but I don't want actual drawers. I just want it to look like drawers, but have like a little bit of that, just a little bit of a texture, but not too much. So that's why I went with the paper. And I went with one long rectangle. Well, I cut 2 rectangles, but I only glued 1 rectangle. And then I took the other rectangle and cut it in half, and then cut tiny little slivers from the ends of the half, which you'll see there. Yeah, I cut tiny little slivers so they were slightly smaller so that they would look like 2 square drawers and 1 long rectangular drawer. And then I glued those in place. And there's not much else to say about that. I think it looks cute. It looks like there's drawers, but there isn't. It's just, you know, a little bit of a 3-dimensionalness without adding too much bulk. The top edge of the dresser wasn't as smooth as I wanted because it was like sandwiched wood together. So it was, you know, textured, and then the wood was different colors, and the paint did nothing to fix that. So I glued a piece of poster board to the top of the dresser and then just cut off the excess and rounded the corners. And there's a little bit of overhang on both the sides and the front edge, just like the top of a regular dresser would have. And okay, so I glued the quilt on the bed in stages because I figured that was easier to manage. And the clamp is coming out again to get that corner to look, you know, all cute. I just tucked in the other side and glued it down. Now I am going in with the marker pen, and I'm just drawing the drawer knobs onto the drawers. I was going to use little like beads. I have seed beads and like tubey beads, but they would basically be the same size as the doorknob, and I didn't think that, you know, because like dresser drawer knobs aren't the same size as a doorknob. So I drew them on. I think it looks cute though. And now the dresser is done, and it's going to get glued in to the room. And it's going on that short little wall under the slanted roof there. Yep, and pushing it into place is when I accidentally smeared one of the drawer knobs. I tried wiping it off. I was thinking I'll just wipe it off and redraw them. Nope. Even pulling out a paper towel, it just smeared and made a gold mess all over that drawer. So I ended up having to just pull it right off. Thankfully, the other 2 drawers, those knobs, perfectly fine. They didn't get messed up. But that drawer, yeah, it had to go. I used the drawer that I had ripped off as a template to cut a new drawer, so it would be the same size. And this whole process is exactly why I like to make these things before I put them in the room. Because this was so fiddly. It was such a small space, and then working around the camera, it was a mess. And once again, I wanted to keep that in here so that if it's a mess for you, you don't feel alone. So there's the headboard going in, just getting glued. Tacky glue, nothing special. There you can kind of see how I just sort of folded the quilt down on the back side. And I shaved down some of the extra fabric after it had dried, just to get it as, smooth as possible. I want this bed to definitely fit in this room. I don't want to have to make it again. It didn't want to go in the room. I got it. And it fit. So, yay! And it does look so cute. I'm very happy with how it turned out. And there's the pillow now that it's all dry. And it does kind of look like a pillow. I really shouldn't be surprised, but I totally am. Years of making miniatures, and I am still blown away by what I can create out of nothing. So that just gets glued into place, and the bed is done. This right here is a beautiful tear-shaped crystal-y bead thing, which I have painted the back of already in a neon yellow, and I painted it by putting it on that toothpick. Now I have this plasticky flower-shaped something. It was supposed to be the chandelier light fixture for a different miniature, but I didn't end up using it, clearly, so I'm using it now. And I thought it would look really cute with that tear-shaped bead stuck inside the middle of the flower. And now I'm going to glue it to the, I don't know, what is that? The apex? I don't know. The top of the roof, basically. The ceiling where it joins. And I hope it's going to work because I have, the flat surface of the flower and then the triangular surface of the ceiling, but I flipped the house upside down to give it its best chance, and it worked. There's the little chandelier ceiling fan thing, and it's glued. It's stuck. Woohoo! Okay, so now what I've decided to do is tidy up the outside of this shadowbox frame thingy. So I cut 2 strips of poster board, just a little bit bigger than that second floor, and I obviously glued the first strip down first, and then I'm gluing a second strip on top just to make it a little bit thicker because it is a little bit recessed into the frame, and just those 2 pieces that bulked it up enough. So then I traced out the shape of the frame on another slice of poster board, and then measured the frame itself and drew those lines with pencil, as you can see there. And now I'm cutting out the inside because I don't want to cover up the work that I've just done in Miniature Land. So I'm going to cut that middle out so I have a house-shaped frame to stick onto my shadowbox frame. Before we move on to the next thing that I made, I want to take a minute to show you just a little strip of paper that I folded and ended up cutting. I originally made it to check and make sure that the chair was the right proportions. So it's kind of a person without arms or a head. And I also used it to figure out the stairs. That's why I cut the legs, to see if that would make, I didn't want the stairs to be too deep or too shallow. And I also used it for the bed, and I'm going to use it for the next thing that I do, which I will show you right now. This little paper miniature doll stand-in thing really came in handy. I highly recommend that you use one of those, especially if you're not following a specific scale, but you still want everything to be in proportion. I also ended up using it for this spontaneous project. I'm making a hoodie, and I started by making the pattern on a piece of paper. I folded it in half so that I would get like a mirror image, so it would be equal on both sides. And then I decided between my fabric. I ended up going, obviously, with this heart printed one. It was originally a hoodie, so it is, hoodie fabric, and I just thought that was better. But also, I thought the plain purple would like blend in too much with the bedroom because it's like purple schemed already. And I also liked the idea of this hoodie being green and blue, because green and blue happen to be the favorite colors of my son and my husband. And they are also the two members of my family who are notorious for leaving their hoodies everywhere. They just drop them wherever they take them off. And I'm constantly finding hoodies on the backs of couches, on chairs, on the floor, upstairs, downstairs, everywhere except where they're supposed to be. So yeah, I thought this would be a nice little nod to my family within this house. And to add a little bit of detail to this hoodie, I went in with just a regular pen and colored the wristbands and waistband. I also made a little kangaroo pouch. That's just a little square of fabric with the sides curved in to look like the kangaroo pouch. And then I also cut out this little circle. It's almost like a teardrop shape. It's a little bit pointed at the bottom. And I'm going to glue that in the middle of the hood. I was trying to give it like dimension. If I ever do this again, I'll put that behind and cut out, because this ends up looking kind of backwards. But it works. It does give the hoodie a little bit of dimension. I ended up coloring that circle in with pen as well to give it some depth. And then these are just some little socks. I cut a sock shape out of, I can't remember what the fabric was, and then colored the heel, toe, and the top with, again, just a pen. And I did that because my daughter, whose favorite color is pink, is notorious for leaving her socks everywhere. So I glued the socks in on the floor of the bedroom, much like the socks that I find all over every floor surface of my house when my daughter just takes them off and leaves them. And then I glued the hoodie on the end of the bed, and to make it look like it was just thrown haphazardly, I glued the body on first and then glued the sleeves so I could kind of layer them and make it look like it was all rumply crumply. After roasting my family with the hoodie and the socks, I figure I can't leave myself out. I have to roast me too. So I cut this strip of purple. It was basically like a packing paper, cardboardy kind of thing. And I used the bookshelf to make sure that I didn't cut it too tall. It had to be at least shorter than the books. And then I used that dowel to get a curve in the paper without wrinkles or creases. Because it's so small, to glue it, I'm using tape instead of glue. Much less messy. If you haven't figured out what I'm making yet, it's a mug. I have a much better tutorial, though, in my mini wooden puzzle kitchen video, which I don't think has gotten enough love. So if you haven't seen that series yet, highly recommend. I'll link it down below. And if you have seen it, go watch it again. I really like it. Anyway, I painted the rim of the top of the mug and the handle dark purple just so it would like clean up and look nicer. And then I put that little bit of brown on the inside to give it like a used appearance. Because when you use a coffee or a tea mug, you get that like brown staining on the inside. Because I'm notorious for leaving my empty coffee and or tea mugs all over my rooms. And now my whole family, including me, is represented with our notorious bad habits in this miniature house.
Well, that took a lot longer than I expected. But it's done. And I am so happy with how this turned out. And I stuck pretty close to my plan. There's a little reminder of what I was hoping to achieve. And I would say I knocked it out of the park. I had to reconfigure the bedroom a little bit because, on a flat surface, it's hard to comprehend how much depth you have in a three-dimensional piece. So I was just guessing with what kind of furniture I'd be able to put in there and how I would be able to put it in. When it came time to putting the idea into reality, I ended up having to change a little bit. But for the most part, I stuck pretty close to my idea. And I liked having this idea. It did, I find, well, on the one hand, it helped to make this process a little bit smoother because going into it, I already knew what I wanted to tackle. But at the same, at the same time, as well planned as this was before starting, and as little detail as there is, especially compared to some other miniatures that I've made, this still this still took a long time. Compared to some of my more complicated builds, I could see potentially finishing this in 2 weeks. It took longer than 2 weeks. So that's just a heads up if you haven't jumped into miniatures as a hobby for yourself. Beware. It can be a lot more time consuming than you expect. But it is very, very fun and so fulfilling when you're able to draw an idea and make it a reality. When these little pieces come together to create a whole little house, it's magic. Oh, I also wanted to mention there were a few things in the bedroom that I didn't talk about, so I will mention them now. On the door, you'll notice two tiny little strips of, it's just the poster board. I cut two little tiny strips and glued them between the door and the door frame to look like hinges. I also made a little light switch. This is just a little rectangle of card with a little rectangular frame, and then an even smaller little rectangle just to be like a little switch. And then I colored it with pencil to give it a little bit of shadow and depth. You could totally just draw it, like just cut out a rectangle of poster board and then with pencil or pen even, just draw the shapes. I layered mine up because I wanted it to look a little bit more three-dimensional. In the corner, you'll see I made a little makeup bag, and that's just a little nail sticker that I folded in half around a toothpick. So you'll notice at the bottom, it's a little bit wider and then pinches up at the top because there's a little strip of toothpick at the bottom there just to, bulk it out and make it look like there's something in the bag. And then I just painted the top first with white paint and then with silver paint to make it look like there's a zipper at the top. And then I put in some posters. That is a little cutout from a calendar. That's from some packaging. That is from like a nail sticker. It's like a I had like a comic book nail sticker, and this was like one of the panels on the sticker, and then that was another little nail sticker, the little camera there. I just cut those out and stuck them down. I'm a little bummed that the hoodie blends in. I didn't even think about that. The purple probably would have been a better option because the green and blue does blend in quite a bit with the comforter there. But it is what it is. That's fine. So this is my miniature dollhouse in a shadowbox frame. A great use for these particular frames from Dollar Tree. I think that turned out really, really cute. And I have like 4 more of these frames. So maybe I'll make a whole little village out of all the different houses. We shall see. But for now, I really, really like this one. And I hope that if you were thinking of maybe doing something like this, if you saw these shadow boxes and had some creativity stirred up in your noodle, that maybe this has inspired you to give something like this a try. It's super cute. And I really like it. It was totally worth the headache of the bed. Yep. That's it for this project. I'm going to be switching up gears and doing something a little bit different in my next video. So I look forward to seeing you then for that. And until then, I hope that you stay fabulous, stay safe, and know that you're loved. Thanks so much for watching, lovelies. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.